Hello. And hello and welcome. My name is Caleb Madden. I'm one of the members of the Outlands Network. And for those who are just joining us now, welcome to the Joyous thing too. So before this conversation gets underway, I just wanted to let you all know the format of this session and how you can post your questions. In a second, I'm going to introduce Aniruddha and Dhanveer. Then I'll step out of the call and monitor the chat box. If you have any questions during the conversation, please type them into the box, and then I'll rejoin the meeting in around 40 minutes or so, and I can relay your questions. So we'll have about 15 minutes for the Q&A at the end of the session before we wrap up. Great. So to introduce our guests, firstly, we've got experimental musician Aniruddha Das, better known as Dr. Das, the bassist and co-founder of Asian Dub Foundation. He inaugurated his solo project Dongsha in 2018 to resume an exploration of electronic rhythm and noise going back over 30 years, predating his involvement with dub. His remit is to investigate minimalism, repetition, and fragmentation in sound, and to demonstrate the proximity of noise to the dance floor and its potential for conveying political sentiment. Dhanveer Singh Brar is a lecturer in visual cultures in the Department of Visual Cultures at Goldsmiths. His teaching and research addresses the relationship between sonic culture, critical theory, and political radicalism in Black and post-colonial diasporas from the late 20th century to the present. Brar recently published the book Beefy's Tune, Dean Blunt Edit. The book revisits the classic 1981 film Babylon and its central character, Beefy, using these cultural moments as a lens with which to examine the recent work of Dean Blunt. So in Beefy's Tune, Dhanveer examines the contemporary policing of genre boundaries and the methods by which Blunt simultaneously evades and contests them. Brar places Blunt's seminal album BBF, Babyfather, hosted by DJ Escrow, within a lineage that includes Trevor Laird's cinematic portrayal of Beefy as a hapless yet razor-sharp cultural critic and educator. Okay, so just to say, I'm really honoured to have these amazing people here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing you guys talk about the book and the issues it covers and anything else that comes up. So unless there's any questions from Aniruddha and Dhanveer at this point, okay, I'm gonna step out now, and I'll see you in about 40 minutes. So great, over to you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Caleb, for the invitation to take part in Outlands. I was just catching the tail end of the Pretty Grim stream, and it was really good fun. I'm looking forward to the Klein performance later. But Aniruddha and I have never met before, but we've been chatting on the phone the past week, right? Isn't it? Yeah. For the past week or so. Aniruddha was really kind enough to send me the work he's been doing as part of the Dongsha and Dispossessed projects since 2018 right up to the present. And I've been just kind of mesmerized by them and kind of been not only repeatedly listening to them, but listening to all the resources which Aniruddha has mentioned as part of making these works, and I've really enjoyed talking to him so far over the past week. So I guess the way we planned it, or the way we talked about it this morning, wasn't it, that I'd throw a question at you, and you'd throw a question back at me, and we kind of do a back-to-back set type thing.
Did you finish your chores?
Yeah, I finished my chores. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Finished my chores. I had marigolds on when you called me this morning.
Awesome, rubber gloves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm a good Asian son. I was raised well. I'll kick off, and I wanted to, because you talked in the notes that accompany your the Dongsha project. and in the discussions we had, you mentioned, you used the word minimalism.
Mm-hmm.
And that interested me a lot because to me, minimal or minimalism would be like the last term I'd use to describe the music on those albums, because they're kind of throbbing. They're so alive with activity, and they're kind of really feel like they're kind of populated. If that makes any sense, like it's both in the sense of populated in the there's a lot of activity, but also populated in the sense that the music seems to want to make room for people. It's got a kind of open door aspect to it. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you're using that word minimalism or minimal and what that means for you.
Okay. Well, for me, minimalism has got absolutely nothing to do with genres. Okay. I mean, you've got the idea of minimalist experimental music, you've got minimalist techno, but I've never related at all to the concept of genre, and maybe that's something that we can talk about later. For me, it's more, it's a feeling, it's a mindset, it's about emotion, and those also relate to aesthetics and also politics. Okay, so I think I first encountered minimalism listening to 23 Skidoo in the early 80s when I'd already become a percussionist, and I had a few instruments, congas and bells and stuff. So I was checking out anything I could possibly find that had those same instruments. And so Skidoo came up, of course, and listened to 7 songs, and I was really amazed. They had relatively few, I didn't even know about this word, minimalism. I just heard this sound, which had so few components in relation to other music that I'd heard. And not only that, it was foregrounding percussion and drums. But that didn't mean it was just rhythmic, only rhythmic. You know, I perceived it as very melodic as well. So even though they had guitars, but even the guitars were very, very rhythmic, very tight, kind of almost like the reggae rhythm guitar, but playing other rhythms. So this is the first time I encountered minimalism, and it really encouraged me to engage in music myself. Okay, so it's like, you've heard of the here's 3 chords, go form a band. For me, it was more like, here's 3 drums, go form a band. So, you know, I had some congas, I had bits of metal, I had your obligatory gas cylinder that I nicked from outside of a pub, you know, because Skidoo had gas cylinders. And so it's the first time I realized you can form music which is very expressive and sort of with a whole spectrum of frequencies and possibilities of conveying emotion, but with, in material terms, very few components, you know, very few instruments, and also very few elements in terms of the arrangement. So you could have basically, what I didn't know at the time was the word ostinato, but you could have repetitive patterns, and just your arrangement and changes happened more through inflections or listening or making mistakes or stopping playing and starting again and all of that. So what happened a few years ago, after 20 years of being engaged in musical production and performance, in Asian Dub Foundation, also in a lot of other bands, in rock bands, jazz bands, whatever. After 20 years, you're engaged in music, which had increasingly become denser in terms of arrangements, and very tight arrangements and song-based arrangements, and not at all to do with improvisation, and very dense in terms of the instrumentation. And then same with production and my own productions and remixes, and getting remixes sent to me, or stuff to be remixed, and people sending me like 40 stems. And the first thing I would do is like strip it down to like 6 things, or sometimes the only thing left would be the hi-hats of the original track. You know, so this frustration with music getting really dense, and I'm thinking, I really want to get back to minimalism. And hearing DJs and listening to the intros of tracks and thinking, wow, I really love what's going on here. Really wicked rhythms, wicked syncopations, wicked sounds. And then what happens? 16 bars in, or even less, the rest of the track comes in. All the other drum kit, all of the guitars, the horns, everything else, and that initial sound disappears, or it gets submerged in the mix. And I'm just thinking, wouldn't it be wicked to continue that intro for 10 minutes? Okay. And then by extension, wouldn't it be great to create music which was just the intro? And the intro goes on for 10 or 15 minutes, you stop, and then you start the intro with another track, and that does the same. So, you know, maybe I should just create an album called Intros. So that what happened and what pushed me over the edge to actually start on this project was hearing just a few years ago Robert Hood.
Right.
You know, I'd already been listening to Detroit music, particularly underground resistance, for the last 15, 20 years. But I'd never heard of Robert Hood. And he, early 2000, had put out an album, which I'd never heard of, called Minimal Nation.
Yep.
That had launched probably 1 million minimal techno tracks and the whole genre, but never heard of any of that. And that just blew me away because of the amount of space in this music and the amount of propulsion and funkiness that was coming out of virtually only the kick. And I think he was using mainly the 909 kick. And I started to think, wow, here is someone doing what I've just been thinking about, and he's been doing it for decades and making really expressive music that was really minimal, both in terms of instrumentation and also in terms of arrangement. Yet he's expressing all of this stuff. He's expressing, you know, his spirit. You know, he's a pastor as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, he's expressing his spirituality,
yeah.
And we could relate to that. You don't have to be religious or Christian, and he's expressing all the other things that Detroit techno expresses. You know, I was sad about dub the last 20 years because I found that Detroit techno was more political and more minimal than dub had become, you know, and which is why and so I heard all of that in what he was doing.
Yeah.
And when the technology came along, just in the last few years, this machine from Sweden called the Digitact, which is a joint combined sampler sequencer, I thought, well, this is it. This is my opportunity to create something minimal like I've wanted to do for some time, and also with, as well, a minimal piece of equipment.
Okay, I mean, there's lots to take from that, and lots of other questions that are spinning out from what you said. I I guess I'd take on the density issue then, because it's interesting. Because another term I wrote down whilst I was listening to your another term that came to mind, and then I started not writing down was force.
Yeah.
Because I thought, well, there's a lot of force in this music, but it's force without domination. So it's a music which is organized by non-dominant forces.
Wow.
And I'm wondering kind of what role force plays, because you've mentioned propulsion, terms like that. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that you need to do, if you're making music that is so minimal, okay, and if you want it to, first thing is the sounds themselves have to be utterly wicked. Okay, if you've only got a kick drum happening at any one point, possibly only that sound, it's got to be the best possible kick drum that you could possibly find, and that goes for every other sound. All right, but that's just a sound there on its own. How do you make this music compelling? So here comes the second thing. It's not minimalism in isolation. It's minimalism, repetition, and fragmentation. And so repetition is what then makes it more than a loop, makes it more than 4 bars. So I'm writing 4-bar patterns, but I'm not writing song mode. There's no song mode on this machine. It's one of its limitations, but it's one of its limitations that makes you creative or think outside of the box, literally. Okay, so how do you make this music move? How do you make it something that's the illusion of lasting 15 minutes when it in fact is only 0.5 seconds of music? All right, so you have a sequencer, and so that's the repetition aspect. And then that alone may not necessarily be enough. Okay, so far what we've got is 2 of the basic principles of dub, because I've not abandoned dub whatsoever. I've abandoned possibly the dub scene or dub as a genre, which I never cared for, that idea in the first place. But dub principles are still there. Okay, so what's one of dub's performative principles? It's the idea of muting and unmuting in order to change what people hear. Okay, so the way this machine's organized, I've actually got it here. Don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
You can see at the bottom there's 16 buttons which relate to 16 steps, and the top row also relate to 16 sounds. 8 sounds that you can mute and unmute. So I use that basic dub principle of muting and unmuting in order to change the composition. And then the other thing is, I'm no longer sitting in front of a computer or doing Ableton and working on the arrange page. My arrangement is live. So having programmed sounds, like initially I program noises, discarded, what I call discarded frequencies, little bits of synth noise that I've nicked from demos of gear on YouTube. All right, I've pitched these and I've looped them. I put them into call and response patterns. All right, and then I build a rhythmic structure to underpin this call and response. Okay, so this is the repetition going on, and then you can cause changes live in the arrangement by muting and unmuting. And then the third aspect, which again, the idea from what the other really performative aspect of dub is the idea of delays and reverbs.
Yeah.
And what one of the innovations of dub was that delay wasn't there just to be set on a sound, just to give it a nice ambience.
Yeah.
They changed the length and the repeats of the dubs, of the echoes on using tape echo, primarily. They changed all of that on the fly. Okay, so it became a performative thing. They would change the rate of regeneration. Okay, so that was one of the main performative things of dub. But what came into the back end of that was distortion. Okay, but a very kind of understated distortion. Now, what I'm doing here with this music is I've got heavily into distortion, and that's because I wish to fragment the music, and that's the final element: minimalism, repetition, fragmentation. One, because I like the aesthetic of breaking things up, of destroying things. You know, dongsho means destruction.
Yeah.
Okay. And dongsho destruction relates to my sound processes, and it also relates to particular political ideas as well. It's double-edged. So what I do is I take a line out of the headphone socket. Again, another limitation of this machine: it doesn't have multiple outs. It's another reason why I can't do typical, what has become traditional dub. Right. I can't separate the kick and the snare and the hi-hat. I can't mute and unmute them. I can mute and unmute them within the machine, but I can't do it on my mixing desk. Right. All right, and then send them individually to the delay pedal. Yeah. So aside from that, I wasn't so interested in emphasizing the delay, because I think it has become one of the cliches of dub. I think it's been very overused, and it's become one of the markers of the genre of dub. Oh, you've got to have your delays, you know. And what I'm doing is dub noise, which is I'm distorting the whole thing. So I send the headphone out to my rat distortion pedal, which is lurking somewhere, and I bring it up on a separate channel, so I can have a totally clean sound, and then I can also have a dirty channel, and I can mix those to different degrees. And again, the different degrees is another part of the performative process. Okay, and then I can also have it becoming completely destroyed. You know, and when I do it live, I warn the sound engineer. I say, look, if you hear distortion, it's not, your speakers aren't fucked. You know, check your meter and you'll see I'm not going into the red. Yeah. Okay, this sound is what is emanating from my tools here. Yeah. You know, the distortion is integral to my sound.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I've thrown a couple at you, so I'll give you a chance to throw some at me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned genre once or twice.
Yeah.
And it was one of the things that I really was interested in discussing when I read through your essay, and it was like Dean Blunt's opinions on his relationship with the concept of genre, which I realized reading what you said was pretty similar to mine, and how he compared it to attitudes towards race, but from a right-wing perspective of race.
Yeah.
So if you could expand a bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I'm riffing off the particular comment and thought that he made, but and ideas he's put out. But yeah, I think there's the Babyfather album is a kind of particularly acute instance of something that I think Blunt's been doing for a number of years.
Yeah,
which is kind of using the forms of fragmentation and distortion that you have at the formal level in your music.
Yeah.
I think in his music, as we discussed earlier, it kind of it's animated at the level of the performative. So what it does then, whereas what you're doing with the distortion and fragmentation of the very idea of minimalism itself,
yeah,
he's doing in order to, let's say, incite and arouse a set of expectations in listeners. I think that's what's going on there. Well, that's the claim. I mean, it might be totally wrong.
You've never asked him?
No. I don't have any contacts with him. So yeah, no, not at all.
I'm kind of doing the same thing. I haven't even talked about why as well. Aside from aesthetic reasons, you know, I love these sounds. And that's why I'm doing that. A lot of the people I listen to, but I'm not sure that I'm necessarily doing it for the same reasons as him. I am trying to provoke. I think he's definitely trying to provoke.
Yes.
I'm not sure who's his audience or.
I mean that becomes an interesting question about audience. I think what it is going on with at least the Babyfather album is this question around, well, I think we talked about it earlier with regards to, okay, well, what do we understand as avant-garde? And is avant-garde necessarily a category that we require? Is it necessary? And I think we talked about it earlier. You said something really interesting earlier, which kind of set me off, saying, well, dub isn't an avant-garde music, it's a people's music. Right? Yeah. It's a form of experimentation that emerges through a relationship to a populace, right? Yeah. And therefore, in a way, the populace are always built into the structures of the music formally. But that's, in a way, that's the space and depth of dub is there in order to make room for dancing, right? To make room for movement, right? The music in dub often appears, or dub type musics or dub continuum musics have often appeared under conditions of intense pressure, intense social pressure. Yeah. So it's interesting. This music, which allows a lot of breath, a lot of air, a lot of movement, it creates space under conditions of pressure, right? And I think what he's doing with regards to genre is saying that, well, there's an experimental capacity going on in musical forms which are never considered avant-garde.
Yeah. And
he's going to show that by exposing expectations, right? So the Babyfather album supposedly is built upon this supposedly absurd idea that a kind of noise palette is being played on a pirate radio station, and that there's a kind of there's a supposedly comic quality to this, right? And in a way, the trick of the album, and it's a kind of high wire act, is to go, well, if you're laughing at this, that's exposing a set of first genre expectations, which he says are a set of racial expectations, right? And but if you listen to it as it is, if you listen to it on its own terms, there's not what's there to laugh about, right? Where's the joke, right? Yeah. And the idea being, well, the joke is that you know, a pirate radio DJ would never play a noise track whilst he's given a shout out to you know, his audience on the streets of Hackney, right? Yeah. And I think that's the trick he's pulling. And in a way, by doing that, it's saying, well, we've never needed a category of an avant-garde, right? Sorry? Because we've never needed a category of an avant-garde, right? Those of us who have been presumed to be excluded from it have never acquired it, because what we've got is a kind of populated music. We've got, I think the term we started using this morning was a folk music, right? The dub is essentially a folk music form, and you could think about reclaiming or claiming folk music, because the key condition of folk music is experimentation through population.
Okay. Right?
Yeah, like it's folk music is always populated, and its experimentation with form always comes about through some relation to gathering, crowd, mass. In
That's really wicked, because I've never approached folk, the actual term, from that perspective, and simply because there's another layer I think going on here, is that a lot of these terms have been dominated by capitalism and the market, and so what are, like soul is a feeling, all right, blues is a feeling, but they've become genres, they become genres in order for somebody to be able to sell them and get them played and marketed and to have people promote them. So folk has also, so because folk has become a genre, it's become associated with, often with, white acoustic guitar music, all right, or world music, and brown and black people with their traditional acoustic instruments.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it's really interesting that you're putting folk and experimental in the same place, which is really good, and that's really where I'm at most of the time, is to actually to not categorize absolutely anything.
Yeah.
To just be into music.
Yeah, but I think it's more about any attempt. Let's say category at its kindest is an attempt to describe as accurately as possible, right? In its kindest, in its most reverential.
That's when you're being kind.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, but
for the most part, it's not.
Yeah,
or I think it's in order to ultimately sell that music.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
To be to succumb to the market. And that's why I think tracks are named. These categories arise.
No, that actually takes me to something I definitely wanted to ask you, going back to kind of circling back to the force question, but because something else I hear in your music is force as a kind of militancy.
Yeah.
And you've described yourself as an anarchist, right? And I think, well, what else is an anarchist or a militant other than someone who uses a force, but never in the name of dominance, right? So anarchism you could describe as the attempt to organize or use force, but never in the name of dominance, right? To kind of, in a way, eradicate dominance through the use of force. So I'm wondering kind of if you could talk about militancy and anarchism,
sure,
and how they play out in your music.
I would say I'm someone who has an anarchist outlook. I'm not sure if I qualify yet. I don't know if I've done enough street time yet. So it's something I'm aspiring to, and there are hundreds of people out there whom I really admire and monitor the work that they're doing, who are real anarchists. But anarchism does definitely come into, in terms of my outlook. And dub for me is anarchist music, all right? It's structurally anarchist. It's bass and drums, which is the underclass of the music. It's a total inversion of Western pop. Western pop has this hierarchy, of voice, guitar, keyboards, all of these upper register sounds, where supposedly that's where the expression is taking place. That's where the thinking is taking place. But underneath that, you've got the workers. The workers are the bass and the drums. They're just doing the functional element. They're providing the rhythm, and they're holding things down at the bottom end. Now, dub is the first time I heard a music, so dub as opposed to reggae, where all of that top end, all of those layers had been stripped away. Okay. Now, something very particular to dub bass is not only does it serves its functional purpose in providing the low end, the low frequencies in all the spectrums, in the spectrum of what you need in a piece of music. Okay. So it's not only does it satisfy that, but it is conveying a melody as well. Okay, that's something that differentiates it from bass in harmonic music or pop or indie music, you know, where the bass player has been told, all right, follow the chords. Okay, now the bass player in dub is not being told what to do. The bass player in dub is an anarchist. Okay, and there is, as such, there is no hierarchy in dub. There is only a low hierarchy. Okay, it's the rule of the underclass and the sonic underclass. Okay, and what was the question?
no, I'm loving it. The bass and drums as the underclass, as the sonic. So I guess.
Yeah. All right, anarchism I'm just saying it's structurally there. So not that I was necessarily making that analysis when I got into dub. I got into it because it was just so utterly different. I didn't get it straight away. I got reggae first because of the social content of the lyrics, and I'd never heard music that was talking about social issues at that particular point, you know. And when I got this about dub, it just blew my mind. It's only recently I just thought, it's structurally anarchist, but then in other ways, what you mentioned about what I'm trying to convey in my music is that it's a lot about metaphor. You know, there's a metaphor in the minimalism, in that in order to be minimal, you have to take a lot of stuff out. Okay, you have to uncover. Okay, and that process of uncovering, that's a metaphor, because I'm kind of, I want people to do that in real life. You know, to uncover what we do for the most part is we see things on the surface, and we do not question, because we do not know what is going on underneath. So you have a bar of chocolate, okay, and so I watched a documentary on Al Jazeera about the chocolate industry just a couple of months back, and it told of the horrors of what it's basically modern day slavery, or one example of. Same thing going on with the mining of materials for mobile phones, electric cars, etc. Okay, so basically we know these things in general, but we do not wish to look below the surface. You know, we wear clothes that are made under near slave conditions in various parts of the world, whether it's China or various other countries, and we don't wish to look beneath the surface. And so with minimalism, it's forcing us to look at the bare essentials of what's going on, the essence. Okay, so there is that metaphor there with the minimalism aspect. And so what's going on with the other performative aspects, particularly the distortion and the fragmentation that I'm doing, is that it's conveying anger. It's you know, I when I sit down in the studio, I kind of literally and metaphorically have my door open to the world. Okay, it's impacting upon me. Okay, and then it's coming out through me in how the sounds are, you know, present themselves, how I squeeze and compress the sounds. Okay, now if you listen to most of the experimental, whatever that means, music that I listen to and that I love is made by Black musicians and musicians of color. And when I compare that to music by perhaps many white musicians, but not all, not my friend Simon Grab from Switzerland, with whom I've worked, you can tell the difference between something that is academic, either academic, people are going to be possibly angry about this and might take me up on it, but academic, or they're showing, this is how much I spent on this gear. Okay. Okay. Whereas sometimes there's people who, through the sound of their music, I can just tell that they're expressing something else, or they've been affected by the world. They've been stopped and searched on the way to the studio, all right? Or they're worried that someone's going to mug them, okay? They're worried about how they're going to pay next week's rent. Okay? There's economic issues, there's issues related to race, whatever, lots of things going on, all right? All right, and so that affects the sounds that you're going to make, all right? And so, and then this relates to another issue that I've got, is that instrumental music can be political without the use of text, okay? It doesn't need text in there. You can hear from the sounds. I was asked this question by actually someone from Norient in Switzerland last year, actually asked me to write a piece, and I couldn't do it. I even forewent the payment for writing a piece, and I could do with the money, okay? But I couldn't write anything with any honesty. And they're saying, how do you make your music political? Your music is clearly political. How do you do that? And I couldn't think, how do I do it? I don't do it on purpose. It comes out like that because of the reasons that I've just talked about. Okay.
But then it's interesting then that then there's not lyric, but there is some relationship to, let's call it, words, because you've made that particular decision to use the Bengali term dongsho, which means destruction. And you also have a track called Intentions, which you said is a term used from a James Baldwin essay. So I'm interested in, so how is that being worked through there? What are those particular choices doing? How are you kind of making this Bengali Baldwin connection to all of that you discussed now with regards to militancy, minimalism, the bass and drums as a kind of underclass in the music?
Basically, related to what I just said, is that I'm not just a musician. I'm not separate from the rest of society. I'm an actual person living in this world and subjected to the forces that everybody else is subjected to. And I'm also, through various media, through reading paper or reading digital media, you know, in touch with stuff that's going on. So all the time, these ideas are going on, and they're not clear cut, neither what I think about them, nor how to articulate them. I'm struggling all the time. And that struggle as well is in the sound of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know, it's really, it literally is. I'm struggling, you know, both sonically and trying to articulate, and so this is what's going on. So I have these various ideas happening, you know. Unfortunately, Baldwin is unfortunately still relevant however many years after, decades after he passed away and decades after he was active and writing, because none of the things that he's talked about have been actually addressed. So, you know, not addressed at a, you know, a national level in the States, nor indeed some of those principles in the rest of the world, you know, structural racism and racism that's built into the psyche and to the structures, the physical and governmental structures of every country. And that statement was the intentions of this melancholic country have always been genocidal. Okay, and it was a part of a particular, it wasn't a written thing, it was a talk he was doing in front of an audience. And I actually sampled that particular quote, and I didn't wish to put it into this piece of music because it can almost be a cliche. I mean, there is a time and a place to do that. So I just used that phrase and it informed the vibe of that music. But what normally happens with me is I've got a stash of ideas, concepts or titles or phrases floating about. And I kind of chop and change whilst I'm writing and working on various sets of music. And so even up until the day that I'm releasing something on Bandcamp, I might 2 hours beforehand change the title of a piece of music. So, you know, but it's not so literal then. But the other thing is, and what you said about people, people are there all the time. My music is definitely about people. Okay, I imagine people all the time. Imagine them dancing. That's another function of music and dance music is propulsion, is fuel. Okay, and fuel means to give people spiritual upliftment, to engage in the things that they are doing in their daily lives. Whether All right.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Sorry, are we running out of time?
No, sorry to interrupt. And like, I was just really enjoying what you were saying.
Oh,
so
right.
No, it's the night time is the right time, isn't it? That's basically what you're saying, isn't it?
Sorry, I was confronted with all this pink, and I do have a pink lens cloth in solidarity.
Is it time for Q&A, Caleb?
It is, yeah. I'm really sorry.
Sure. Okay. Well, we were talking about people, so you know.
Oh yeah, people, great. Yeah, people are definitely there, and they're usually wearing black hoodies, and that's what I imagine. In a dark room, side lit, chiaroscuro. But anyway,
I can't wait till we're all back in dark rooms listening to this music, to be honest. But that's been so great to listen to that. One thing I've found is monitoring a chat box means that I didn't get to kind of concentrate as fully as I'd hoped. So that's something I've learned. But what I did manage to sit in and listen to was great. Thanks so much, both. So yeah, we've run over a little bit. We've probably got about 10 minutes for questions. If that's okay. So I'm just going to read a couple of questions directly from the chat box. I'm not going to introduce any of my own at this point. So I'm going to do them in the order they came in as well. Let's see how this goes. So this is from DJ Escrow. I think this is a question to both of you. Was the film Babylon influential to you, Aniruddha? And maybe how has dub been influential to you, Dhanveer? Perhaps as a kind of mode of education. That's something you mentioned in Beefy's tune. So yeah, I'll start with you, Aniruddha. Was the film Babylon influential to you at all?
I guess it was. I guess we identified with the racism. We identified with what was going on at the time, with the town, with the music, with what the music was saying. Incidentally, you know, the theme Warrior Charge was this instrumental, and that's the theme. And you hear that horn line and you hear that bass line, and it conjures up all of the political issues. So I don't know if I latched onto that principle at the time, but yeah. And it cemented my love of the double deckers as well, you know, probably. That was meant to be funny.
Yeah. I laughed. It's all right. I laughed.
You laughed. That's good.
Yeah. Dub. Yeah. I mean, I guess dub was formative for me without me even knowing it. In that, you know, my first, not my first, but let's say my first teenage obsession was jungle, and I wouldn't have known what dub was as such, perhaps, when listening to jungle, but I guess then is a sense of not so much dub, but dread that becomes formative, right? Dread as an effective sound, dread as a feeling without source, and dread as a kind of attitude. And then by trying to find out, well, where does this dread effect in jungle come from? I then as I got into my later teens and 20s, it was dub that I realized, okay, well, here's this effect in jungle and drum and bass, but it seems to be the total effect of the music rather than a kind of a part of it. So yeah, I'd say dread as a more, not more than dub, but kind of dread as the effect of dub, yeah, has been formative for me.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks. Great. I'm going to move on. I think we've got time for one more question at least. So this one's more about the genre and the kind of ways you've been discussing genre and minimalism earlier in the conversation, and I know it relates to the whole book of Beefy's Tune and that whole idea of staying within your own genre and testing people with Blunt is kind of testing people, I think, maybe in some ways, of what he's doing within a given genre. So this is a question from Body Levels Man. Do you think that the genreification of a style of music is necessary for a kind of progression, i.e., it forms a concreteness from its initial kind of fragmentation, still in motionness emergence, which must then be refragmented in order for a new kind of music to come?
Yeah.
Do you want me to repeat?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Yeah. I think it's I think, as I said, I kind of was alluding to earlier, I think description, I don't think, okay, I'll say it because I'm involved in some sense in criticism or trying to think critically about music, that in some sense language is, or not, description is necessary, but it needs to be careful description that has a faithfulness to the music, and not only a faithfulness to the music, but a kind of faithfulness to the person or to the people doing the thinking, and so the genre terms are kind of, they're like, what's that term that Cecil Taylor talks about, unit structures, right? And his music is built upon this idea of assembling something and then taking it apart, and assembling something on top of that and taking it apart. And yeah, that's how genres live. That's how, I would say genre, so that's how musical systems live. Then genre as an attempt to describe the way musical systems emerge, collapse, and then re-emerge afterwards, or something else, is a similar process. So I think often what's you need to make a kind of fine distinction. Genre is often a language process, right, and a description process, and musical systems can have lives of their own. And at points, the language process and the musical system meet in a really neat way. Something like grime, right? The language used to describe that musical system seem to fit really well. At other times, they don't fit so well, and then there's tension. There's nothing wrong with having tension between the language game and the game of making musical systems. That's productive. But anyway, I'll let Annie come in.
I would kind of say music develops and changes despite these borders being put around it. And I'll just say, why put these borders there in the first place? you know, because then the changes are then defined as fusion or stuff like that. I don't like the word fusion either. You know, I've always disregarded borders in music and in communities, you know, and you heard that disregarding of borders very graphically in the music of ADF. Okay. So yeah, I accept the notion that you may have to literally describe something in order to get them to try and somebody to try and audition it in the first place. All right. But I would just say, just give it a listen. If you don't like it, you don't have to listen or dance to it, but make your own mind up, you know.
Yeah. Great. Brilliant. Well, thank you both. That would kind of lead us almost bang on time to where we should be. So I think I'll leave the questions there and just say a massive thank you to both of you for taking part in this session. It's been really fascinating to listen to. So yeah, just a massive thanks again for being involved.
Thank you for inviting.
Yeah, it was great fun. It was good fun. Yeah.
Thank you for introducing me to this geezer. Carry on talking, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm more than happy to have made that connection. I'm honoured to have made that connection. All right, great. Well, hopefully you'll stick around and check out some more of the live stream over the weekend.